My name is Ananya Marathe. I'm 21 years old. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio, but I'm studying international development and education here at American. I'm a junior in the School of International Service, and this is my study abroad story.
'Cause this is Africa. This time for Africa.
I always knew that I wanted to study abroad, and that was part of the reason why I chose to attend school at American. The reason why I chose Kenya in particular actually started during my freshman year world politics class. Our professor showed us a documentary called Good Fortune, and it basically talked about the disparities of international development in the context of the reality and what was actually implemented. And basically, this documentary took place in the Kibera slums of Kenya, and for some reason I was just fixated with what was going on there. And I was really fascinated by how the people on the ground there were coming up with their own innovative local solutions, problems that the international community couldn't even figure out. And when I entered my junior year, I realized, hey, like this is what I want to do with my life in Nairobi, and I actually got to intern in the Kibera slums. And it was kind of like my experience came full circle because I went from watching the documentary in my class to living it on my own, and it was an incredible experience. It was really fascinating because everything was from a developing nation's perspective, whereas in the United States, I'm so used to everything being from, an American perspective. And oftentimes when I was in the class, I realized I felt kind of guilty for being American, because a lot of the times the class would talk about how there was so much burden and struggling and poverty, and then they would contrast that to America. And oftentimes I almost felt like the juxtaposition was a little unfair, but I also realized how fortunate I was. AIDS, and the professor asked, how many of you know someone that's impacted with AIDS? Everyone in the classroom raised their hand except for me and the other American, and they thought we were lying. And I realized, like, for me, like, AIDS is something that, I've learned a lot about, but I don't know anyone personally affected by it. And I heard so many stories of my classmates talking about how their mothers had died. And then the worst was that my good friend in the classroom who sat next to me was diagnosed with AIDS. And that was something that really hit home for me because she had been such a supportive peer to me in this whole process, and like it was so hard to even think that she may one day not be able to access antiretrovirals and she might potentially die, and that was just very hard for me. I remember one distinct memory in which I was virtually the only person that wasn't Kenyan in the entire slums. And I remember people staring at me, and I felt so out of place. And oftentimes people would, call and shout out derogatory terms like Muzungu, which means white person, quite literally, and Muhindi, which is kind of a derogatory term for Indian. And I came to realize that in Kenya, Indians are kind of viewed with a negative stereotype because a lot of the Indians own the businesses there, and many Kenyans feel that, Indians are unfair in their business practices. So I often felt kind of uneasy, to go down to the slums, but luckily, everyone treated me with kindness that I met and interacted with personally. And for the people that did shout things out to me, I tried not to take it to heart, but it was definitely a crazy, unparalleled experience for me because in America, we take it for granted that it's a melting pot. It's not unusual for you to see many different races interacting in a mall, in a classroom, anywhere you go. But in Kenya, the looks we got were incredibly awkward at first, and then you came to, understand. And it was just really interesting to see, like, a lot of people hadn't even met anyone that wasn't, Kenyan. So oftentimes when I would go to Kibera, they would touch my hair and say, is this real? Is this real? Can we have it for weave? And I'd be like, no, no, please, like, I want my hair. But it was just a really interesting experience. Was the laid-back attitude of Kenyan life. For example, in America, we're so used to instant gratification, but in Kenya, I quite literally, it was delayed gratification. They were on two ends of the spectrum. We could go to a restaurant and order something, and 2 hours later, they still wouldn't have our order. And everything was just gentle. Like there's a saying, no hurry in Kenya, and I found that to be quite true. Tribalism is huge in Kenya. Like each person belongs to a specific tribe. So I came to realize very quickly that there was tribes like the Kalenjin, the Kikuyu, the Bantu, the Maasai, and that was huge. Like people had such pride, and that was something that I had to be sensitive to. And it was crazy because sometimes I would say, "Oh, that lady wasn't that nice to me," and they'd be like, "Oh, that's because she's from the Luau tribe. The Luau tribe are known to be very flirty," and that was something that was crazy to me. I think it was a little hard for all of us to adjust to the fact that we were different. And I think that really played into things. So once we realized, we have to be observant and respectful of the culture that we're in, it made things a lot more comfortable for us. To the Westgate Mall, but the last minute we all decided, oh, we're gonna go camping and we're gonna go away. And while I was camping, I got phone calls from my mom who was frantically worried about me, and I was like, oh, everything's fine, everything's fine. And then that's when the news broke about the shooting. Like the first thing in a lot of our minds was, what if we were there? When we got back home from camping, we could see the smoke coming from the mall, and it was still under attack. And I remember that night hearing gunshots outside my window because the mall was under siege, and the police were battling, Al-Shabaab, the terrorists. And it was just the craziest thing in the world. And I remember that night, sleeping with a hammer under my pillow because I didn't know what was gonna happen, and I just felt so unsafe. There was basically no information that was being put out. Here in America, there's an overload of information, but there, Kenyans were so desperate for information, and the government wasn't giving us anything. And my parents in America were getting better information than I was in that own country. There was no assurance from the government that everything was going to be okay. Literally, the house was in the middle of nowhere. It was the middle of the rainy season, and there was no bathroom, there was no electricity, and the house was called a temporary bungalow, which basically means that the floors are not made of permanent substance. So my floors were made of mud. And I was really scared when I first got there because I was so nervous. There was no bathroom. There was basically a hole in the ground where you would go. There was no toilet paper, and there was a stack of leaves. And interestingly enough, the toilet was next to the cows. So I thought that was interesting. You have some neighbors while you're doing your business. But when I got there, I was really, really terrified. But my family turned out to be incredible. I had two brothers, and I had my mom and dad. And we didn't really have a kitchen, and I remember I was helping my mother wash the dishes, my host mother, and she had said to me, oh, I hope that one day God blesses us with a sink. And that just really hit home with me because that's something that we take for granted, having a sink on a dishwasher. I sometimes, at home don't even like to do the dishes, and I have a dishwasher. So I would have to sweep the floors every morning, and it was really irritating because I would literally have to get down on the floor and wipe it. And all of the neighborhood children thought it was a show. So whenever I would bend down to do my chores, they would all bring their friends and be like, come watch the Mzungu do the chores. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is not a show. But it was just so awkward. They were all pointing at me and laughing and going, ha ha ha, she cleans. And it was just wow, I can't believe this is happening. Of course, a study abroad trip isn't fulfilled without having some funny stories thrown in there. I think the most funny story that I have from Kenya is definitely when I traveled to Uganda to go whitewater rafting on the Nile. So basically, when we were on the Nile, I had tampons with me. And basically, we had guides that were with us on the rafts. And they had told us, we can't keep anything with us, so if you have any medicines or anything, give it to us. So I put my tampons in the bag. And later, when we had finished everything, we were, eating lunch on the riverbank, this guy, my guide, gets up in front of everyone, holds the tampon and goes, "What is this?" in front of everyone. Like literally there was like probably like 100 people there. And he was like, "What is this artifact? Someone come claim it right now." And I was so embarrassed. So then I'm like, "Oh, it's mine." So I go up there and he looks me in the eye and goes, "What is this?" And so I was so embarrassed, I told him that it was for nosebleeds. And then he told me, he was like, "Oh, that makes sense, you know?" Like, he asked me to show him how it works, so I showed him. And he said, "You know, that makes complete sense. So many people get nosebleeds from the rafts hitting them. Can I have a couple?" So I ended up giving him a couple of my tampons. uh, After about like a day or two in, I realized like I just felt like kind of strangely empty in a way, because it was Christmas time and everyone around me was so into, you know, buying gifts and doing that. And I remember it was so hard for me not to compare things. Like my parents would be like, "Oh, do you want this?" And they'd spend $10 on like, you know, I don't know, buying ice cream or something. And I kept converting things to Kenyan shillings, and I'd be like, "Wow, $10 could buy my friends in Kenya like a meal for a week." And all of these things, and it was really hard. And after a while, my friends at home had to tell me, "Hey, Ananya, like, you have to stop comparing yourself or you're gonna drive everyone around you crazy." People would come up to me and be like, "Hey, can you give me some money so my kid can go to school, so my kid can eat?" To like America, where there was an abundance of wealth and food. Like I'd go to Christmas parties where there was so many cookies and people would throw the cookies out when no one ate it. And I kept thinking of my host family back at home and how my host mother kept saying, "You know, one day I wish God would bless us with a sink." And like I couldn't look at my dishwasher when I like got home. It was just really hard for me. Our, you know, professors had talked about reverse culture shock, but you know, I thought, "Oh, that won't happen to me," but it did happen to me. And I felt like in a way I was different as a person because I always wanted something more, but when I came home I realized like all the important things that I wanted were already there. I had friends, I had everything, and it was just fascinating to see the transformation that happened with me, because I realized that all of those things that I thought I wanted were just giving me unnecessary worry, when in reality, like, everything that I ever would want to be happy was within me the entire time. But at the same time, I think now that I'm back from Kenya, I'm always going to try to live in the present and just, you know, be mindful of perspectives.
Cause this is Africa. Tamina, mina, eh, eh.